And we will get started. So, hi, everyone. Welcome to Accessibility Basics, how to create inclusive and accessible courses. I am Lindsay Bryde. I'm SALT's Course Content Accessibility Specialist. Um, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to create more accessible course content. Now, we're going to be starting with kind of defining what two big terms are that we're going to be using today, which is accessibility and remediation. We'll be talking about Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, what it is, and how it's going to be impacting the way we look at accessibility in the next year. And then we're going to talk about some accessibility fundamentals and best practices for formatting, images, links, and color contrast, as well as some tables and spreadsheets. We'll see how far we get. But we'll begin with kind of the basics. And if you have any questions, if you don't mind putting them in the chat, I'll happily also have some Q&A at the end of the session today. So accessibility and remediation. When we talk about accessibility, it's referring to the design and implementation of products, services, and environments to be usable by all people. Now, this can include those with disabilities. So when we talk about accessibility, we're talking about just the general usability and access to information, whether we have a disability or not. Short term, long term, what may have you. When we talk about remediation, which is going to be a word I use a lot probably, it's the process of correcting or improving a product or document's accessibility issues to meet technical standards. A great example of this is what's called the WCAG 2.1 or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And we're basically trying in remediation to enhance usability for everyone. So accessibility, we're trying to talk about making it usable for everyone, irregardless of a timeline. And remediation, it's an actual process that we follow to correct something that was once inaccessible to make it accessible. Now, this is all important because of a lovely law called Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law in 1990. Now, when the law came to be, the internet was less than a year old. So when they were writing this law that was negotiated over many years, they really didn't know how big the internet or technology was going to play a role in this Americans with Disabilities Act, because Title II of the ADA prohibits public entities from discriminating against an individual on the basis of disability. So by excluding them from participation in services, programs, and activities. So we are denying someone access. Title II is saying you can't do that. By 1996, the Department of Justice established that web and mobile content was protected under the ADA, yet they did not provide specific guidelines or a minimum standard. So they were recognizing content on the internet, digital forms, documents needed to be accessible, but they didn't set like a specific standard of how to do that. In April of last year, the DOJ published a new rule updating Title II. And for this Title II rule, they set a technical standard for web content, stating that the WCAG guidelines 2.1 level AA is the technical standard for state and local governments' web content and mobile apps. So the rule goes into effect based on the population size of the state or local entity. Us at SUNY Stony Brook, we are under Title II because we are a state institution, and we have a population size over 50,000. So that means we need to be in compliance by April 24th of 2026. If you have heard this, I'm sorry for the elevator speech again, but I can't assume who's heard which part of this. Now, there are some things for getting started with preparing for April of next year when the law goes into effect. Review your old digital content. Remove anything that's old or outdated. Any digital documents, web pages, media that you are thinking, I'm going to be updating this anyway in the next year. Well, flag it now so that way you're not driving yourself crazy trying to remediate it just to get rid of it in the next year. It's a good time to purge in that regard. Then worry about remediation. So start updating any digital content that is not accessible or finding those alternatives for anything that was old, outdated that you were going to be getting rid of anyway. Choose a strategy that works for you. So one way would be to go over any material for classes that you teach most frequently or that you have the most students enrolled in. Like start with what's going to give you the biggest bang. Um, as an alternative, you could begin by updating a single type of content across all courses. So like starting with just your Word documents, remediate all those, and then move into like your PowerPoint slides and your videos. So both methods have their pros and cons. It depends on what your priorities are. And then finally, recognizing what makes the document accessible from the start, which is where a big portion of my talk is going to be about today. We want to make that if you're creating new content, we're making it accessible from the beginning because it's a lot easier to make something accessible while you're writing and developing it than to go back and kind of retrofit in all of the remediations. CELT does have a number of tips on how to make content accessible after today's session. I'll send an email with a copy of this slide deck with the links that you can then go and use at your discretion. But our self-accessibility page does have a number of self-paced resources and guides so that if you're kind of digging in and trying to figure out what to do after today, there's a self-paced resource for you to also go take a look at. So let's talk about Ally. Ally is our friend in Brightspace. It is an automated tool that displays in every content page or every module of Brightspace. And it's going to show you accessibility scores for every page that has been created in Brightspace, as well as any documents that have been uploaded. So if you are someone who is uploading Word documents or PowerPoints, Excel spreadsheets, PDFs, those all are going to display with an Ally score. And as you can see on the right-hand side of my screen, you have a screenshot of a series of pages in Brightspace and a lovely little meter that appears to the next to the title of the pages. And based on where the direction of the meter is and the color, it will indicate the level of accessibility in a document. So if you're seeing a dark green indicator with the needle pointing all the way to the right, the file is accessible and really no edits are needed because it's 100% perfect. We like it. If it's high, it's going to be a light green indicator and the needle is going to be at an angle. It's going to be a little bit to the right still, but it's not going to be flat. And the file needs some minor edits to meet the technical standard. So it's close to being accessible, but it's not quite there. And we're going to talk a minute about how to then go and find out what needs to be fixed. Medium, it's an orange indicator and your needle is pointing kind of to the middle straight up and the file needs moderate edits. So you're probably gonna need more than 1 or 2 edits, but it's still closer than the lowest of the low, which is the red indicator with the needle pointing at an angle to the left. And when we have the low indicator, it needs immediate attention. It is not meeting really any accessibility standards. And those are definitely, if you're seeing red indicators in Ally, it's something that you want to maybe like triage or focus in on fixing first. Now, how to find out what to fix. So if you click on the indicator, it opens your Ally report. And you'll see the top issue of what's creating the biggest concern. That always is what displays first in the report at the top. But if you click on the all issues link that's in the Ally report, you'll be able to see all the remediations that are needed. And you can click on any item to see more information about what Ally found. So it'll explain what the issue is, if there are any instructions on how to fix it. So it'll guide you through the process of how to fix it. And it'll also provide you with any suggestions on how to fix it. For Brightspace pages, so if it's a page that you created in Brightspace, Ally even has functionality to allow you to click and it will fix the issue in the code based on your selection. So if there's an issue with color contrast, it'll go, there's an issue with color contrast. There's like 4 other colors you could use. Which color would you like to use instead? And you can pick the color that you would like to change it to, and it'll change it in the page. But if you're working with something that was uploaded, like a Word document or a PowerPoint, it'll give you the instructions on how to go and fix it in the original document, because you have to go fix it in the original document if it's uploaded. So Ally can be a really good friend for helping kind of guide the process. And we like seeing all the dark green indicators, because it means we're that much closer to a fully accessible course. Now let's talk about formatting. Now, you want to use headings to direct traffic. So if you're creating pages or Word documents, headings or semantic HTML organize your headers in a logical order. So your header 1 is for the main title of the document. Header 2 is for major subsection or major sections. So like if you're having major sections underneath like the overall document, and header 3 is for subsections. I've seen a lot of documents over the years where people will like use bold or underline to indicate those headers and those titles, or they'll like increase the font size. That can be visually informative for a user, but for someone who might be low vision or using a screen reader, you do want to use the actual styles section of like your Word, like as imaged in my screenshot, or use the header tabs that are in Brightspace if you're using a Brightspace page. You want to avoid skipping heading levels. So for example, you don't want to go from header 1 right to a header 3 without a header 2 in between. So I want to know what the section is before I know what the subsection is. And please make sure that if you're using a header 1, your header has text in it. Please don't make images header 1. So if you have a banner that has the title of something in it, you can have the image, great, have the image, but then underneath put the actual text directly into your content. So it can be tagged as the header 1 label. And in tools like PowerPoint, your header is the equivalent of like this title of the slide. So each slide title would be like a header 2 to indicate what is the focus of that slide. So we like headings. They tell us where to go and where we are in the document. Some best practices for writing headers. You want to be descriptive, so using clear descriptive headings to provide context, avoiding vague titles like introduction or details. And it's like the introduction to what or the details to what. Keep it concise, so headers should be brief but informative, avoiding any unnecessary words or really lengthy paragraphs of sentences. Avoiding decorative use, so that thing, like I said, of avoiding using images as headers. You want them to be actual written text. Using a table of contents for longer documents, so Word files. So when you use headers in a Word document, and you can create a table of contents, it'll automatically pull from those tagged headers to autofill your table of contents. So you don't have to write it all out and figure out where all the pages are. Word has the ability that if you set your headers right, it'll create the whole thing right there for you and organize itself. Excellent tool. Formatting with paragraph tools. So if you want to create white space or lists in a document accessibly, use the paragraph tools for formatting. Don't add multiple blank spaces or lines to create space. Instead, you can use the control or command key and enter keys to create a page break, or use the tab key or the indent buttons in an HTML editor to create indentations, because every time you just hit enter, 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 enter to create a white space, if I'm using a screen reader, it's literally saying blank, 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 blank. And if you have it enough times, it starts to sound like a really bad EMD song. Same thing if you're using the space bar over and over and over again to create an indent instead of just hitting the tab once and you hit the indent like 5 or 6 times, it'll just go space, 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 space. And again, it's gonna start to get a little grating for our screen reader user friends. We want to use built-in lists to create tools. So don't type out lists phonetically. Screen readers won't know if it's a list and won't read it correctly. So what not to do is what I have listed of having item one to item two, but I didn't use the number function. I just typed 1, 2, 3. But that means that if I'm navigating through, I don't know that that's intended to be a list, that information is intended to be gathered together. So what you want to do for lists, bulleted or numbered, is to use the actual bullet function or the number function. I can't tell you how many times I've seen lists that have dashes before the item of the list instead of a bullet. And while it may seem fast, it could potentially put your users at a disadvantage as they're navigating through the document. We want to set and check language settings. So if you are working with multilingual documents or paratexts, you want to ensure that the primary language used in a document is set accurately. Many Word documents by default in America are set to English, but if there's another language being used, that's the primary language used throughout the document. You can set the language for that language. If a second language is being used, again, paratext translation work, any content in the second language needs to be manually tagged. So for example, I have this phrase in English of welcome to the first day of introduction to Italian. Now, because I have that set as English, my spell check is going to work correctly, and a screen reader will know how to say that with the proper accents and emphasis. If I wrote this same phrase in Italian, but I said it to English, it's going to sound like a really bad tourist, I think is the best way of describing it. So now I'm going to sound like a really bad tourist. Benvenuto al primo giorno di introduzione all'italiano. It's going to sound very stilted and uncertain. And also my spell check and my grammar checks are not going to work because it doesn't know what language it's reading. So we want to set languages correctly. So excellent question from Leslie. If two languages are used in the document, you can actually go and change the language settings if you're using Word or if you're working in an HTML page, there's ways of fixing the language codes. And we have additional, wonderful. So there are ways of changing it, and I can quickly show you, at least in a Word document, because I have one open. Where you can highlight the part of the document that's in the second language, the secondary language that's being used. And in the review area, there is a language button. And you can set the proofing language. So the proofing language overall would be the main primary language being used overall, but you can set the proofing language to change the content to the secondary language. And that will fix it. And I hope that answered your question. And just because of time, we're going to move on to the next part of this. Images, alt text. So alt text, we want to check that all images have alt text or are marked as decorative. Note, only mark an image as decorative if it does not add any value to your content and it's present for strictly aesthetic purposes. So if you added a line because you felt like adding a line to make it pretty, that is decorative. It's not adding anything. But if we are adding like a screenshot, we want to indicate the purpose of that screenshot, as I have to the right of my image on the screen. Some best practices for writing alt text. And we're going to see if it's not going to let me. Is describe the content and function of the image clearly, include any details that convey your image's purpose. You want to aim for brief descriptions. So this used to be so much easier when X, formerly Twitter, used to have a character limit. It's about the same as an old school tweet, about 125 to 150 characters. And yes, I am dating myself by remembering when tweets had a maximum character limit. Use complete sentences or phrases and any appropriate punctuation to enhance clarity. A big misstep that can be taken for alt text is you may write it all out in lowercase quickly or not include any punctuation. But again, it will not display appropriately or read correctly if you're using either a screen reader or if your internet bandwidth is not correct, is not complete or full. Pages won't load fully to show the text correctly because alt text will display if you have low internet bandwidth instead of the image. You want to address how the image relates to the surrounding content. So you don't have to repeat everything that's like in the instructions of your main content in alt text. You're kind of giving what is the purpose of the image to complement the rest of your writing. You want to avoid redundant phrases like image of or picture of, and only include a description of the text or image if it helps visualize your content. The only time you would include like a description of the image would be if you're having like a particular style of artwork or an illustration or a graphic. In that case, then it would be like an illustration of, because that is giving me an idea of what does it look like in particular. Oh, it's not a photograph, it's someone drew this. And maybe that's important context. There is an amazing image accessibility generator. It is probably one of the few times I will encourage people to use AI. Arizona State University has an AI generator that will, if you upload the image, it'll provide a copy of alt text and longer description of that image that you can then take and edit as you will, but it can help you brainstorm and go, how do I describe this image? Oh, well, here's at least one idea, and you can work from there. And then I know I've said the word long description, so I'm going to help define what a long description is. So when alt text does not provide enough detail, so when 125 characters or one or two sentences is not enough to describe the image. So for instance, if I am giving a set of statistics, I want to provide a longer description for that image to convey detailed information for when a user specifically requests thorough explanation. This is commonly used for images in the STEM fields. It's also very commonly used in art history to provide, again, that context and the meaning of all the nuances and details of my image. So it's helpful when more context is necessary for someone who maybe has low vision. An example of a long description here, I have a diagram of the human heart, and maybe my alt text might read a complex diagram of the human heart to at least give the purpose of the image. But my longer description is going to describe how it's a detailed illustration of the human heart, showcasing its anatomy with various parts labeled. The heart is depicted in a cutaway view, revealing the internal structures, such as the atria, the ventricles, the veins, the arteries, the valves. The heart sections, such as the right atrium, right ventricle, and left ventricle, are also labeled. So I'm breaking down the parts of the image that are pertinent so that I have a better idea of what it is that's in the image and why we're studying it. And long descriptions can either go immediately underneath an image, or you can link them to a separate page if you want them to be like an aside for those who want to view it or see it. But long descriptions can be very helpful when you're having very complex images. Links. So adding links to pages. Please keep it simple. We want to be concise and meaningful text for links. So for example, for additional information about the new Department of Justice rules on accessibility, visit the ADA's fact sheet. Notice that my hyperlink is for the entirety of the text, the ADA's fact sheet. It is descriptive of what the purpose of my link is, and it's unique to that link. So that way I know exactly where I'm intended to go when I click that link. You want to provide context in surrounding text. So when possible, place links within information that, again, provides critical insight. You don't want to drop the whole link, so please avoid using URLs for link text. So in my example below it, I have the full ADA guideline link, www.ada.gov/resources/the date, and all of these additional details. Now, this is inadvisable for a few reasons. It's really long and it's taking up real estate of your space, but also it's not informative or telling me exactly where I'm going or the purpose of the link. So you always want to embed hyperlinks behind text that gives me a sense of what am I going to or where am I going. It is also inadvisable to avoid repetition. In the early 2000s, it was really popular to have the words click here for embedded link text when we started to figure out, oh, we should embed our links. But everything ended up being click here, which meant that we didn't know which click here would take us to where. So you want to make sure that your link text is unique and not repeating multiple times on the page. So we know where we are being directed. And you want to avoid opening new windows without warning. So if a link opens in a new tab or window, you want to inform users by including text like opens in a new tab or opens in new window as part of your link if you are setting your links to direct someone outside, because that can impact both users who are strictly navigating via keyboard and also screen reader users who are navigating. And even if you're not using a keyboard or a screen reader alone, it can be really frustrating to suddenly be opening up 20 new tabs without knowing where the link is clicking you out to. So it can be a pet peeve for some. So be mindful and forewarn them of, if you're clicking this, we're taking you away from this page. Color. So color contrast is important. High contrast between text and backgrounds makes it easier to read, especially with visual impairments or those who have sensitivity in low light conditions, or lovely people like me who have tinted glasses because really bright lights mean that I have a hard time seeing colors accurately. Strong contrast draws attention to key elements of your design. So you have that contrast to make it clear what is important. So good contrast helps readers quickly and easily understand the information being presented, thus reducing our cognitive load. So it helps us think more clearly when we have high contrast or high luminosity between different colors. Um, I have an example of good contrast to my top right of the screen, where I have the university colors of red on a red background with white text saying good contrast. So you can see the bright white having nice contrast against the darker red. Whereas in my lower right corner, I have a university red color on my background and black text. And it's this bad contrast because the dark black on the dark red means that the colors are very similar to each other and therefore have insufficient color contrast. So we want to have that luminosity between colors. It is also a valuable tool that I'm going to share in our chat that if you're uncertain about certain color combinations, there is a number of tools, but I personally recommend the WebAIM color contrast checker because you can select what your foreground color is and what your background color is, and it'll literally tell you if you have sufficient color contrast, if you pass or fail. on your color contrast. We also want to be careful that color is not being used strictly to convey meaning, because you always want to have color and text. So do alt text and captions meet a minimum color contrast? So for example, are your captions a light gray on a white background? Is the link text different from a non-link by more than just color? So is it bolded or underlined? We want to make sure that we're telling the difference between different elements or figures. Same thing if I have at the top of my image on the right-hand side, I have a green and a red button. It's just green and red, but I don't know what the green and red mean unless I put text over them, like I do on the bottom side where I have the same green and red buttons, but now I have a good and a bad label. Like, oh, okay, this is good, this is bad. I can tell the difference between the two. Traffic lights are always consistent of green, yellow, red. So that way I know if it's illuminated, which indicator is telling me to go, to slow, to stop. So having either some type of consistency or method of describing the information is always important. So we are not strictly conveying meaning through color alone. And like I said, the color contrast checker for WebAIM is very valuable because you can open the checker and they have color pickers where you can use an eyedropper to tell the difference between your two colors. And I will bring my color contrast checker over and I can click on the color picker for the foreground and use the eyedropper to select a color. And I can use the color picker to pick my background. And when I scroll down, it'll show me based on normal size text. So anything that is 12 point or lower or large text to 14 point or higher, if I have sufficient color contrast, and it'll show me my combination together and what it looks like. And it'll say if it passes the WCAG guidelines or fails. So this can be a very, again, useful tool if you don't want to guess, do I have sufficient contrast or not? Tables and spreadsheets. So if you're using data for Microsoft or Google products, some best practices for tables. All tables need an identified header or a header row. You want to name all tables and sheets to maintain clarity and organization. Just be aware, screen readers always begin at cell A1. So always include any in content in the cell because if it's blank, it'll just be like a really long pause and someone will go, is the sheet blank? Is there nothing here? Because it can be so long, someone's going to think something's broken. So that content can be as simple as noting the title of the table, the chart, or the first column's header information. Some people will put maybe instructions and put like the font really teeny tiny to kind of give any pertinent information that someone who's using a screen reader would need, that someone who is sighted maybe doesn't need in the same way. Always mark blank fields as either blank or NA. So that again, if I'm using a screen reader, it's telling me if this information is present or if this has been intentionally left blank. Delete any empty sheets and insert images in cells. If it's over cells, a screen reader won't know how to read it. So it only reads cells or content that's in a cell. So if you are doing an overlay, that image, that chart, it won't read. It doesn't know to read. Some other inaccessible practices to avoid, merging or nesting or splitting of cells. Again, this is for our screen reader friends because any of those cells will not read in the correct order. So just like how we want to have headers in the right order, we want to know the order of information as it should be read. You want to avoid controlling spacing with blank rows or columns, because again, that creates blank or dead space. Before someone's just hearing the word blank read over and over again. If you're using tables for design layout, Microsoft or Google Docs have a number of formatting options that are a little bit more accessible in that regard, to help you design and format content rather than trying to use the table rows. Avoid freezing or hiding rows or columns. This can be an issue for both screen reader users as well as anyone who is navigating via keyboard or other assistive technologies, because it creates a barrier for those users. So it is always good to have a simple header row at the top, and each column have a specific purpose, as well as each row to be labeled and filled out. Video. So if you are using multimedia, some best practices. You do not want to use blinking or flashing multimedia. It can cause seizures in individuals with photosensitivity. This can also be created if you're using like PowerPoint animations and transitions, because if they blink, again, photosensitivity, you could accidentally trigger a seizure. Check that all videos from the internet, so YouTube, TED Talks, have closed captions and transcripts. Note captions and transcripts are different. You do need both. Captions are text that appears in a video. So it plays along and is timed to everything being said. A transcript is a separate document that provides all of the text being read, but it does not have the exact timings of when something is being said. Transcripts can also have audio descriptions, so describing anything that is on the screen that is not being spoken about verbally. It can also have information about any nonverbal cues that may also take place. So if like a dog is barking in the background or we hear a tire squeal from a car, the transcript would have that information included to provide context for users. Please do not set videos to automatically play when a page loads. This can actually create quite a bit of a issue for someone if they are in a low internet bandwidth situation, because the page could freeze because all of the videos are trying to load at the same time. Users should be able to control when a video starts to play or not. And YouTube and TED Talks both have settings that you can use to say, I want to have the video embedded, but please don't start playing it immediately. Just load in the background. Use animation when it helps convey a concept, not to draw attention to an unchanging object, because that can, again, be distracting or uninformed for a user. And we're going to have a very fun video of why you want to check captions. As I make sure that my video is going to share my audio. Okay. Hopefully you can hear this, and if not, please tell me. Oop. And we're gonna hit play on this again. Hopefully the audio works this time.
Did you have to have your whole grade 12?
The whole grade school.
You got to get through that part.
You got to get through that part.
Okay.
We have some programs.
Let's stop here. This is all wrong.
YouTube's automatic closed captioning service doesn't always, or even often, produce correct captioning on its own. As you saw in the video clip, sometimes the automatic YouTube-produced closed captions are completely incorrect. Thankfully, there's an easy fix to this problem. You can edit these automatic captions or upload a transcript of the audio to your YouTube video in order to produce accurate closed captions. The important thing is that when the video says, for example,
I've just bumped into Dr. Peter George. Hello, sir.
Rick, welcome.
You have a med school here, right?
the closed captions don't, as this clip originally did, incorrectly suggest that the speaker said, quote, I just pumped into Dr. Peter George. Hello, sir. Welcome. School here, end quote. Because that's just ridiculous. Caption your videos correctly and make living and learning easier for everyone. For more information, go to accessibility.mcmaster.ca.
So this video has a number of different captioning errors, but as the video's narrator did point out, for YouTube videos, or if you're using our own in-house Echo 360 to load videos, you do have the ability to edit your captions and edit your transcripts so that your users have the accurate information. Automated transcriptions are relatively good. They get you like 90% of the way there. But according to our lovely WCAG guidelines, captioning and transcription should be at least 98 to 99% accurate. So it is important to go in and check your captions to make sure that if there's any errors that the AI captured, that you're correcting them. Personally, my favorite is SUNY always comes out as sunny. So you want to take out that extra N and capitalize everything. But captions, again, they tell us something about what is not only being said, but also give us insight and direction into it. So please be careful with your captions and caption accordingly. Boop. And that is all of my talk today for all of my best practices and basic accessibility tips. You can always email us at celt@stonybrook.edu or visit us at www.stonybrook.edu/celt. And as I said, we do have an accessibility resources page on our CELT site that now has information about Title II. You can go read the rule for yourself, as well as our self-paced accessibility guides. We have a general accessibility that goes through a lot of what I talked about today, but we also have specific resource guides about Brightspace, Google Workspace, Microsoft tools, and PDF resources, as well as long descriptions. So lots of fun self-paced resources. Also on our CELT site, towards the middle portion, we have support options. You can always book a one-on-one consultation with me by submitting a request form. So if you have specific problems with a document and you're hitting it a block and you can't go forward further, you can stop and ask me and we can meet and go over everything. We also have workshops and drop-in sessions available. We have drop-in sessions Tuesday through Thursday at noon in the faculty commons every day through the rest of this term. So you can come to a drop-in session and again, come talk to me or one of my colleagues and we'll help you get started. And then we also have our PDF remediation services. So if you are someone who has PDF documents that need additional help with remediating your documents, you can submit your PDFs and we will review it and determine what is the most accessible version that we can provide you with, whether it's remediating the PDF itself or if we have to provide you with a transcription. So these are all resources that again are on our CELT accessibility site that I highly recommend take advantage of because all these resources are here and available for you. And at this time, I'm going to stop my screen share and I'm going to ask, does anyone have any questions, any concerns, anything I can answer or clarify today? So Leslie has a question. What if a link opens in a new window tab on your computer, but not on theirs? That would be something that is highly unusual. Generally, if a link is opening in a new window or tab for your device, it would open on someone else's, unless there's some discrepancy between the browsers or you have a personal setting so that it always opens for you. But generally, if that link is set to open in a new window or tab for you, it's going to open in a new window or tab for your fellow users. That might be a difference between browsers, but as a due diligence, if you're seeing that it opens, I would give the warning still, because that means that there's something in their individual browser settings that's different. Yeah. And again, if you have questions, you're more than free and happy to turn on a microphone, or you can put it in the chat also. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has. You're welcome, Clara. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. I'm going to turn off the recording.